Hi, have you ever taken a personality test, such as the five-factor model or Myers-Briggs? Did it help you understand yourself more deeply? Why some situations feel comfortable and natural, and others leave you feeling stressed out or overwhelmed? I believe we can apply a very similar concept when it comes to understanding dogs, instead of using labels such as fearful, anxious, or reactive. Applying generic advice to all dogs under a certain label has one major flaw. We try to treat the symptoms, not the cause. But by understanding a dog's functional character, we start working with their innate behavioural role, and that changes everything. If we can truly understand who a dog is at their core, their functional character, we can support them in a far more precise and meaningful way. I was introduced to canine functional characters in 2016 by Dr Isla Fishburn, and I've been studying them ever since. And this knowledge has completely transformed my behaviour consultations and training classes. I stopped asking, how do we adjust or stop this behaviour? And started asking, what is the root of this behaviour? Where does it come from? Just to be clear, functional character isn't about putting dogs into rigid boxes. These are not just another set of labels, but a clearer way to know and understand dogs. The problem with general behaviour labels is simple. They describe what the dog is doing, but not why. Take two dogs that bark at strangers, for example. The reason behind that behaviour could be completely different. One dog may be genetically predisposed to scan the environment and alert their group to potential danger. The other may simply be overwhelmed and lacking confidence, or carrying trauma. From the outside, the behaviour can look very similar, but the motivation driving it is very different. And if we don't understand that motivation, we risk applying the wrong solution. But how can we tease apart canine behaviour and get to the bottom of things quickly and easily? So what is functional character? Functional character refers to the innate behavioural role a dog is predisposed to perform within a social group. They are born with a set functional character, and this doesn't change throughout their lifetime. Functional character is not the same as breed traits, and it's not simply learned behaviour. They are core behavioural tendencies that influence how a dog interprets the world around them. They also explain the social interactions and dynamics within a group. Change the group or an individual, and you change the dynamics. Functional characters were first observed by the noted wolf biologist, Dr Gordon Haber. He studied wolves for 42 years in Denali National Park in Alaska, and he observed that individuals had different roles within a group, and he called these functional characters. If you're interested in reading his research notes, they've appeared posthumously in the book Among Wolves, but you will need a box of tissues. Functional characters were then taken further by Dr Isla Fishburn, a conservation biologist and wolf expert, who gave meaningful titles to the 8 core and 1 associate character. When we understand a dog's functional character, we begin to see what motivates them, what stresses them, and how they process social information. We also begin to see what role they naturally try to perform within a group, particularly in a multi-dog household. Dogs can show elements of other characters, depending on the environment and situation and who's around at any given moment. But they each have one core functional character, And once this becomes clear, behaviour often starts to make far more sense. There are 8 core functional characters: defender, follower, guide, hunter, lone individual, observer, overseer, and peacekeeper, and 1 associate character, the nanny or guardian. But that isn't seen in an individual until they're about 18 months old. I'll briefly introduce each of them before looking at a few more closely for you. The defender. Defenders are responsible for protecting the group and the territory. They're quick to respond to perceived threats and often place themselves between their group and something they consider suspicious. When misunderstood, their behaviour can easily be labelled aggressive, but in reality, they are simply doing the job they are programmed for. Follower. Followers are highly social dogs who thrive on connection and reassurance. These are the dogs that run up to other dogs and go, "Hi, shall we play? Shall we play?" They tend to look to others, human or canine, for guidance. And when confident, they can be wonderful companions, but without appropriate social exposure, they can become anxious or uncertain. Guides. These are natural decision makers and have a strong instinct for self-preservation. They are calm, thoughtful dogs who often influence the behaviour of others through subtle communication rather than force. They may come across as stubborn, as they prefer to do things their own way. A little on that later. Hunter. Hunters are typically slim, agile, very fast-moving dogs, built for speed and rapid response to movement. Their attention is strongly drawn to anything that moves, and they have an almost endless to-do list of things to investigate, pursue, or track. Because of this high level of activity and mental engagement, many hunters can be quite lean, and guardians sometimes comment to me that they can be difficult to keep weight on. The lone individual. Lone individuals sit slightly apart from the typical group dynamic. They have big personal space bubbles and a very small network of friends. They are more independent and often less motivated by social interaction. These dogs are loners and content with their own company. More on those later. The observer. These are the worriers of the canine world. I call them worrywarts. Their role in a group is early danger detection. They are naturally vigilant, easily startled, and very sensitive to environmental change. Training can help them cope with the world more comfortably, but they will never become naturally bold dogs because worrying is part of the role that they perform. The overseer. Overseers are what I often describe as the quality assurance managers of the dog world. Their focus is on stability, predictability, and routine. They are most comfortable when life follows a predictable pattern and everything is where it should be. When things feel uncertain or out of place, overseers can become quite unsettled. They may bark persistently at their guardian, pull at clothing, or attempt to draw attention to something they feel that needs correcting, such as a briefcase or a handbag put in a different place. When we understand that drive for reassurance and order, many of their behaviours begin to make much more sense. The peacekeeper. Peacekeepers are social stabilisers. They intervene when tension builds within a group or between 2 individuals, diffusing conflict before it escalates. They are typically tolerant dogs who prefer harmony within the group. They may appear extremely submissive, particularly when puppies, or deferential to other dogs. The nanny associate character. This is an add-on character. It can't be seen in an individual until about the age of 18 months. So if you have an adult dog that shows unusually nurturing behaviour with puppies or very young dogs, the chances are they have a nanny associate character. Let's take a closer look at 3 characters that are often misunderstood. Excuse me. Defenders. Defenders may come to dog professionals because their behaviour has been labelled aggressive. Excuse me. They may bark at visitors, guard the home, or react strongly when unfamiliar dogs approach them or their family. However, from the defender's perspective, they are performing their role, managing risk. If we treat this as a training problem without recognizing the underlying role, we often end up fighting against the dog's instincts. Whereas when we understand the defender's character, the goal becomes appropriate boundaries and management and not suppressing the instinct entirely. Defenders are not fans of low-confident individuals. I saw this very clearly with my own dog, Ava, when she was a puppy. She repeatedly targeted a 3-year-old male lone individual in the household. From the outside, I would have said it was bullying behaviour. This was at the point of me just discovering functional characters. But when I looked at it through the lens of functional character, it became clear that she was repeatedly challenging him, essentially asking, "Where's your strength?" He was the only male in the group. He had no strength because lone individuals are lower in confidence. Now, because Ava is part staffy, this behaviour could so easily have been labelled aggression, and in different hands she might have been rehomed. But once I understood the underlying motivation, everything shifted. Instead of trying to suppress her instinct completely, the focus became about providing clearer boundaries and guidance so she could express her role as defender in a more appropriate way. Guides. Guides are fascinating because their influence is often quiet and subtle. They are not necessarily pushy dogs. In fact, many guides appear quite calm and thoughtful. But within group settings, they often influence the behaviour of others in remarkably effective ways. They may interrupt escalating interactions, particularly if there's no peacekeeper in the group. They may redirect movement or simply hold a stable presence that other dogs respond to. When people understand their guide properly, they often realise their dog has been trying to organise situations rather than control them. A real-life example of the stubbornness of the guide functional character comes from my own female guide. At just 10 weeks old, I was working with her on retrieving toys. After a few minutes, I thought, oh, she's completely zoned out. So I threw half a dozen toys across the floor and laughed, "Okay, go your own way, little one." And she immediately set about fetching the toys back to me one at a time. What can you say? An example of the guide's self-preserving instinct came from a female working border collie who attended a workshop several years ago. She lived with 2 male border collies, a defender and a follower, and all 3 dogs worked in the fields with their guardians and the guardian's sheep. The guardian's concern was that although the female border collie would help drive the sheep down to the barn, she refused to help pen them. Instead, she would climb up onto a trailer or a straw bale and watch the 2 male dogs finish the job. Now, when we viewed that through the lens of functional character, this made complete sense. As a guide, she was displaying a strong self-preservation instinct. Being in close proximity to use in a confined space like a barn carries risk, whereas out in the field, she could always create distance if needed. Without that understanding, this dog could quite easily have been labelled a failed sheepdog and ended up in rescue. The guardians were absolutely overjoyed. Lone individuals These are another character that can be easily misunderstood in a world that often expects dogs to be highly social. They can appear aloof and disengaged, but that independence is simply part of their natural behavioural structure. These dogs often don't feel the same need for constant social interaction with other dogs, and when we recognise that, we can structure their lives in ways that respect that independence, rather than repeatedly pushing them into situations they find stressful. And I saw this a lot at my training classes years ago. In 2013, I was given a little 10-week-old crossbreed terrier by someone who didn't want him after he bit her daughter on the face whenever she picked him up. When he was 4, his functional character was assessed as a lone individual, which totally explained him not wanting to have anyone invade his personal space. He helped me understand so much about those dogs that hardly ever want to interact with anyone from their group, human or canine, and why he only had one dog that he would play with for his whole lifetime. He was about 10 inches at the shoulder, and his best buddy, a lurcher. Once we recognise a lone individual, the pressure to make them more social disappears. It also helps us to educate children more deeply about paying attention to a dog's warning growl. What's interesting is that once you start recognising these roles, you begin to see the same patterns appearing again and again in different dogs, irrespective of breed or breed predisposition. If you're a trainer or behaviour professional watching this, it's worth thinking about the dogs you've worked with over the years. Have you noticed certain patterns emerging? Dogs who seem to take on similar roles within households or social groups. Those patterns are often where functional character starts to reveal itself. For those of us working professionally with dogs, understanding functional character can be incredibly powerful because it encourages us to ask different questions and to look at various behaviours in a different way, through a different lens. Barking can have different motivations, as we know, but look physically identical. For example, a defender may bark at visitors coming into the home due to its defending, protecting role, and an observer may bark at them in an attempt to prevent them from approaching their personal space. Both dogs are barking at visitors, but both have different motivators. Once we understand a dog's functional character, we can begin designing strategies that align with the dog's nature instead of potentially working against it. And that often leads to more sustainable outcomes for both the dog and the guardian. However, let me be clear, we must understand that you cannot train functional characteristics or functional responses out of a dog. For example, you will never teach an observer to be brave. Neither can you teach a defender to be accepting of dogs running up to them on a walk. It's rude, they don't do it. Why this matters for dog guardians? For dog guardians, understanding functional character can be incredibly reassuring. Many people live with behaviours that feel confusing or frustrating or even worrying, and they're often told they simply need to train harder or be more consistent. But when we begin to understand a dog's functional character, we realise that many behaviours are not problems to be fixed. They are expressions of the role that dog is naturally inclined to perform. A dog who alerts to every unfamiliar sound may not be overly anxious. They may simply be an observer doing exactly what they're designed to do. A dog who positions themselves between their guardian and a stranger may not be aggressive. They may be a defender managing what they perceive as risk. And a dog who prefers to keep their distance from other dogs may not be antisocial. They may simply be a lone individual who's comfortable with a smaller social circle. Remember their big personal space bubble. It's very important to these guys. When guardians begin to see behaviour through the functional character lens, something important shifts. The focus moves away from trying to change the dog's nature and towards understanding how to support that dog more appropriately. When we start working with who that dog actually is, life often becomes calmer and more predictable for both the dog and the human. When we begin to recognize these patterns and take the time to understand a dog's functional character, behavior stops looking random. Instead, we start to see the purpose behind it. The motivations become clearer. The patterns begin to make sense, and many of the struggles people experience with their dogs start to look very different. Rather than trying to change the dog in front of us, we begin asking a more useful question: who is this dog? And what role are they naturally trying to perform? For me, that shift in perspective has been one of the most important pieces of the puzzle when it comes to helping dogs and their guardians live more successfully together. It's totally changed the way I look at things as a behaviourist. This is the approach I explore in depth in my workshops and educational work, where we assess dogs in real time and observe how these functional characters play out within a group. If you're a dog professional watching this and you're starting to recognise these patterns in dogs you work with, I genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching,